Okay, our fourth and final speaker in this phase, which is called How to Change a Mindset. And I talked about water earlier and how nourishing it is and how it sustains us. But there are many people on this planet, which is 2/3 water, who don't get a clean drop to drink day by day. So it will be very interesting to hear what the Chief Executive Officer of one of the world's largest water pump manufacturers has to say about how he and his company are changing mindsets. He is Mads Nipper, Chief Executive of Grundfos, which is from Denmark. Mads.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure and privilege to be here. I represent, as Henry said, I represent an SDG 6 and 13 company who also happens to be not one of, but the biggest water pump maker in the world. And I deliberately say in that order of magnitude because if we define ourselves as a company who is a pump maker, then what we will become is a pump maker. Whereas if we say we are somebody who greatly cares about water and sanitation and have a major role to play in the climate action, our mindset, our entire series of actions actually takes a totally different level of altitude, and then we happen to be a pump maker on the side of that. That's a major difference in shift in mindset in companies like ours, as I believe it is in many others. Now, I'll speak to you in 3 brief chapters. One of them is I'll take the liberty of speaking to what stands in the way of a mindset to happen, mindset shift to happen. Then I'll speak to what I believe are some of the critical choices that business leaders must make. And then finally to give a little bit of evidence of what is it that we at Grundfos do to overcome some of those and actually make a difference in our actions and not just in our words. Now, starting with what stands in our way, if you'll allow me to be a little bit politically incorrect for a second. Now, partnerships are critical to happen. The Secretary General said that we must work together to solve these challenges ahead of us or harvest these opportunities. And that is very true. But what stands in the way? Now, a little bit stereotypical, you could say, we view each other in a way where if you look at the UN, there would be people who would say, UN is bureaucratic and slow, difficult to work with. There would be people who would say that government representatives care about being re-elected the most. There would be people who would say that NGOs don't like business. They think that there's a discrepancy between doing business and doing good. And there would be people who could maybe rightfully claim that investors and unusually also CEOs would think short-sighted and be greedy. Now that is not a very good starting point for collaboration and partnerships. So we must change that mindset. We must change our ways of doing things and prove that the others who might stereotypically view us in that way are wrong. But we must also, as partners, change our views of what the other absolutely necessary partners are doing, because otherwise we'll never trust them and then nothing will happen. Now, if we turn to business for a second, because most of the people in this room are business leaders, CEOs and other leaders of companies, what we really would like to do and what we talk about is to change the world. But the realities are, now that most of the things that happen in the boardrooms at the moment is we talk about Brexit, we talk about oil price, we talk about what's the real underlying growth in the Chinese economy, we talk about global uncertainty, we talk about US and French elections, what are the implications of the global business environment, free trade. That is a fact. We spend a lot of time on doing that. At the same time, if there's one thing CEOs don't like, it is risk. We love business plans with a tangible outcome. We don't like risk a lot. And that combination of really having potential partners that we don't trust a lot and spending our times on many other and imminently very important things for us is a very bad starting point for starting a journey where we with integrity and forcefulness address the SDGs. That brings me to the second chapter of what must happen. As business leaders, we must, as my fellow speakers have already strongly indicated, we must make the choice that SDGs and social responsibility, at large, corporate social responsibility, is not a department, is not a report. It is at the very core of the strategy. And unless that choice is made at the boardroom and executive team level, you have my personal promise that nothing will happen. It'll be symbolic actions and nothing more. Then we must also ensure that we avoid the terror of the awe. Allow me to explain for a second. There are many people who say either you make business or you do good to the world. That is a terror that we have to work around. We have to insist as corporate leaders it is doing good in the world and doing good business, because otherwise it's philanthropy, and most of us can't afford that in the long run. So we must ensure that we find innovative and new ways of actually making business that does good in the world. That's why it needs to be anchored so solidly in the strategy. And then I think most of us, at least I can speak for my own company, we must ensure that we have the courage to act our way into a new way of thinking. Because if we can believe that we can intellectualize and think and strategize all the challenges and saying, here are all the solutions, we are wrong. We will learn as we go ahead. As Francesco just said, trying to predict what will happen in 10 years, let alone next year. Let alone what are the challenges that will meet us. What does the business environment look like in just a few months? We don't know. So we need to act our way into a totally new paradigm of how we think. Those are choices that business leaders must make, because otherwise it will be very difficult. Now, Grundfos is a company that has focused or is focusing on 2 of the SDGs, water and climate action. And why is that? Well, one of them is we made up our minds and said this is a wonderful opportunity. Now, water is a foundation for all life. We're all aware of that. At the same time, we see the glaciers melting, so climate action is foundationally important. Water pumps alone is more than 10% of total world electricity consumption. And with existing technology, that could be reduced to half of that level. Very few people know that. At the same time, World Economic Forum has, for the 2nd year in a row, named water the biggest challenge of the world. And therefore, strategically addressing that is of foundational importance. And if you take climate action and water and sanitation, those 2 SDGs are foundational to solving 15 out of the 17 SDGs. That's how interdependent they are. The second good reason for why we have chosen that is that we are good at it. In all modesty, we are good at water and climate action. And my point with that is, I believe that companies should choose the SDGs that they're good at, because if we all try to do something where we will save the world, but we're not good at it, the likelihood of succeeding is very low. So we must build on something we're already good at, which we are trying to do. And then finally, to ensure that we actually work with the right partners. There are many things in this field that we don't know. We have chosen to work with many partners who actually know things in our field that we don't know. An example, refugee camps, or rather refugee societies, because they unfortunately stay for a lot longer than just a few months. People spend on average up to 15 years in a refugee camp. They're in desperate need of clean water. We want to make that difference, but we don't know what happens in refugee camps. But NGOs who work with refugees do. So we partnered with the Danish Refugee Council and made something which we call the Humanitarian Business Lab. And those words are carefully chosen, because humanitarian indicates this should make a difference for people, a real difference. Business indicates that it is something where we want to make an honest buck, and therefore to make it sustainable, both for our company but for people who work with that. And finally, lab indicates we're experimenting. Neither the Danish Refugee Council nor Grundfos have the solutions, so we're experimenting our way, or in other words, acting our way into a new way of thinking. And finally, final example, we are working with Nairobi Water in Kenya, where we thought we were going to sell pumps to them, but what we found out was the challenge was not really to distribute the water more efficiently. It was that there was a very corrupt and inefficient distribution system for water. And that meant we innovated as a result of that partnership. We innovated, call it an ATM for water, with a clean and corruption-free distribution of water, so that it actually got to the people at the right price, instead of just innovating a new pump. So it brought inspiration to us from being more open to partnerships that we have worked with. So that's a little bit of example of what we have tried to do. Now, my plea to all the business leaders in this room is to join us on the SDG journey. It's a wonderful platform. It's a shared vision for humanity, but it is also a shared vision for businesses for how to ensure that we also are around and have made a big difference in 50 years from now. Dear friend of mine once said, if you think about what you want to leave behind, think about what should people say at your retirement speech or even your funeral speech. And if people told about me that I made money for already rich people, and that was all I did, it would have been a sad and a poor life. But if they said to us at our funeral speech, he or she was part of making a fundamental difference to the entire planet and to people in the world, that is something which is foundationally important to make up the mind. Do we want to make a difference, or do we only want to run a business? Thank you.